Hello, everyone. We will be starting shortly today's webinar. Please have a look at our Q&A and chat functions and leave your name and where you're from in the chat function if you wish. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this CMS in Touch event today. We will start in a few minutes. Please leave your name and where you're joining us from in the chat should you wish to do so. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and a very warm welcome to the CMS in Touch event. I am absolutely delighted to be able to introduce today's event, which is linked to a wonderful special issue in the Journal of Management History. We have 4 panelists with us today, so it is really a treat, and many thanks to them for joining us at a fairly unsocial time of the day for them. I would like to just highlight that we are recording this session, and so you will find the recording after the session on our YouTube channel. Also, please join our CMS in Touch X social media channel and our LinkedIn channel to keep up with all our events and our sessions that are going on usually at least twice a month. So we have had a busy year this year, and we will continue to have a wonderful program of events in the new year. And now, without any further ado, can I please ask our panelists of today to join us? Thank you, Nick. David, Rosetta, Fernanda, thank you so much for joining us today. I am really excited about this special issue. And I know we have colleagues joining us from all over the world. Please, I would like to ask you to introduce yourselves and the special issue. And then for everyone attending, if you can please put your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen, that would be great. And then you can post them as we go through the presentation and today's event. And then we will collect them at the end, and our speakers will respond to them all together at the end. Okay, so many thanks and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the CMS in Touch team and to organization and Journal of Management History. My name is David Jacobs at American University at Washington, D.C., the land of the Piscataway. I'm very happy to be here.
I am Fernanda Sauerbronn. I'm associate professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I'm really happy to be here and honored to share this special issue call with all the CMS in Touch community that I know is broad around the world. Thank you for inviting us to be here today.
I am Rosetta from Florida Atlantic University here in Florida, USA, and I'm very happy to be a part of this panel.
Thank you. And my name is Nicholous. I am from Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And I am delighted to be on In Touch and with this wonderful community that I have found a sense of belonging for the last 5 or 6 years now. So looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you very much to all of you. And shall we proceed to the PowerPoint?
Please, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, change slide.
It's already shared. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, so critical biography is a methodology we propose, a qualitative approach to doing historical research in management. The major principles are looking at values, roles, contexts, contributions, and identities of individuals to develop a network of portraits of people and thereby improve our sense of the history of ideas. There was a publication in AOMLE, Academy of Management Education, in 2007, in which we introduced the notion of employing critical biography, and a number of articles have appeared which use the model on Mary Parker Follett, Frank Gilbreth, among other subjects. In some cases, the narratives have been biographical, but not as critical in the sense that we originally intended. There's a call for papers now in the chat. Sarah? Thank you. Oh, it's nighttime for Nick.
Thank you, David. So whether we think of the rise of management history, if we dated back 30 years ago with the call from Mayer Zald, if we go back even further, to us it's immaterial. What we are contextualizing our call for papers on is, over the last 20 years, there has been a reimagining, if you will, of management history and its utility to not only theory development, but also our understanding of business and society. And so we have taken seriously the work that Mick Rowlandson has done with colleagues, both Peter Clark in 2004, or I should say, and with Charles Booth in 2006 with the launch of Management and Organizational History Journal, which 2006 really is a landmark year because that was also when the Journal of Management History also relaunched. But we're taking serious their treatise on opening a critical historic turn. And we emphasize critical because their essay had called for work that would develop new methods of doing history, but also new and creative, dare I even say provocative ways or styles of writing. In our search, we have surfaced, and thank you, David, for making this point earlier, that biographies, they do exist in the literature, especially in management history scholarship. But we are contending that there are few, and hardly are they surfacing the critical issues that we would like to see, such as the role of values, the socio-historic role of individuals, the context in which they are A, embedded, or B, that they are embodied in, as well as the contributions that are either lost or contributions that we see in management history that are celebrated, and who then are not celebrated, and why that is the case, and as well, very importantly, the identity of those biographies and of those who are doing the biography? Sarah? That is not to say that the biographies that have been written, both as a style of writing, but also data, are not important. We read throughout management history, broadly defined, we read of many different characters. Some are more celebrated and others are more written about. We read a tremendous amount on Frederick Winslow Taylor, Elton Mayo, Gant, so on and so forth. These are wonderful individuals in one sense of having innovated some theories, but also individuals that have had their own problems in history, dealing with groups of people and treating history in a particular way. And so we would like to acknowledge that this work exists and these biographies have been published, but in so doing, we would also like to problematize that I think we're convinced that there is more room in management history than just a select few and their story. Sarah, next. So introducing our special issue in the Journal of Management History. It's a journal that I have had a long association with dating back to my days as a doctoral student. Broadly defined, management history, the Journal of Management History is an outlet that espouses publishing rigorous, high-quality research that utilizes diverse methodologies, theoretical approaches on issues that are related to management thought, research, and practice. Now, as one of a few special or specialty journals in management history, JMH is interested in work that considers issues dealing with business, management, organizations, broadly defined. In fact, we like to say that the Journal of Management History is a big tent that broadly defines history, that is open to any type of historical thought and analysis. Why we've chosen the Journal of Management History. It is a place that has published over the last decade quite a few pieces that use biography as data and or as method and or as theory. And we would like to take this conversation down a critical pathway and to join those that have used biography in a way to show whose story is being told, whose isn't, in what context, values, and identity. So that's a bit of a backstory as to how we've landed at the Journal of Management History. I pass it over to my next colleague.
Thank you, Nick. Let me go over what we mean by values, roles, context, contributions, and identity. This actually is a template that has evolved. We've added identity to take into account the contribution of all sorts of identities, including gender identity, political identity, ethnic identity, as they affect the sorts of contributions individuals make in the management context. By critical biography, we mean a range of narrative forms, anything from a vignette or a more fully developed account in which we consider decisions and actions by the individuals confronting their problems and practicing theory, developing theory, interacting with the environment. And in each case, the individual, as he or she meets the environment, there are roles that they follow in the sense of roles in organizations. There are social contexts in the sense of communities, societies, institutions, and they make contributions of a variety of kinds. This is meant to be comprehensive of all the sorts of theoretical and physical and product contributions one might make. When thinking about a number of social reform individuals in the US context, it became important to recognize that their specific heterodox identities contributed to what they did in the world. For example, there are a number of social reformers, of social workers in the US context who turned out to have, as they say, Boston marriages. They were individuals who were challenging all sorts of orthodoxies in their times, and it became apparent that identity is obviously an important thing that contributes to the role that people play in the world. Sarah? And in thinking about the various contributions individuals make in terms of thought and other forms of interventions, I think it becomes evident that there is a significant divide between those who are motivated by a humanist participatory paradigm or a functional elite paradigm. I think, and we think, this is an important factor. That is to say, in the various disciplines within management history, we find some people who are inclined to think that ordinary workers and others have a right to participate in organizations, and they want to build an organization in a society in which there is relative equality, versus those for whom hierarchy is a fundamental defining factor. You'll see, as we consider a number of thinkers and practitioners, that hierarchy becomes the governing principle of the contributions they make. I believe that's true for Frederick Taylor, and I believe it's true for another individual I'll mention in a moment, Frank Schmidt. Obviously, we don't all have to accept the value of this dichotomy, but I think the axis of authority and hierarchy ends up being decisive as we look at networks of individuals across organizations. Sarah? And also, as we look at ideas in formation and theoretical contributions, one should recognize that theories are not fixed. Even if someone comes up with an idea, it never remains fixed. As others address it, as others interact with it, it is protean. Subsequent thinkers can revise and reconstruct theory. And even on the humanist participatory dimension, someone who contributes a rather democratic theory of organizations can find that contribution dulled in that democratic aspect as others intervene to protect elites. Sarah? Now, in a conference long ago, Robert Hoyer, a political scientist, said quite insistently, we should be ambivalent about equality. We would counter that as we look at the world of organizations, we should be ambivalent, even wary of hierarchy. This is obviously a defining feature of CMS, but it's an important principle to address as it affects the thinkers and practitioners we are considering. Unjustified obedience, fixed hierarchies have been closely associated with ethical lapses and abuses. And yet, of course, in management, people are inclined to accept hierarchy. They regard managers as the subject of the enterprise. And we find this curious in that even in medicine, we think about the consumer, the person who is seeking health, not as if the doctor were the principal element in the medicine world. Sarah? To counter the idea of hierarchy, one thinks of the values of Prince Kropotkin. He wrote in Mutual Aid, "It is not love and not even sympathy upon which society is based in mankind. It is the conscience, be it only at the stage of an instinct of human solidarity. It is the unconscious recognition of the force that is borrowed by each man from the practice of mutual aid, of the close dependence of everyone's happiness upon the happiness of all, and the sense of justice or equity, which brings the individual to consider the rights of every other individual as equal to his own. Upon this broad and necessary foundation, the still higher moral feelings are developed." Kropotkin had a great deal to contribute to evolutionary theory. And I think he's an important counter to those who assume that the purpose of an organization is to uphold hierarchy and nothing else. Sarah? Now, to provide a point of two individuals who represent different poles in this humanist participatory functional elite dynamic. Think of Frank Schmidt, who's recently passed. He was a very prominent psychologist, psychometrician, who argued for the use of meta-analysis. He was responsible for developing improvements in meta-analysis, for practicing it. He was an IQ enthusiast. He asserted that IQ was correlated with competency across every job. He was a signatory to the 1994 Mainstream Science on Intelligence statement in the Wall Street Journal. This is a curious thing, as he told us that one could consider IQ relevant to any job in an organization. He wasn't merely providing a study of organizations and human individuality. He was defending a conception of rigid hierarchy, which placed various groups at the bottom and various groups at the top. And in a sense, that's something that should be recognized in his work. I'm not suggesting that his work be disregarded, but that it should be placed in context so that his notions about the relevance of IQ testing for creative jobs and for other sorts of professional jobs and for manual jobs was not really very persuasive. On the other hand, Douglas McGregor's human side of enterprise contrasts theory X with theory Y. We all know this. But what is very interesting about the treatment of McGregor's human side of enterprise is that even his defenders did not fully accept the dimensions of his argument for the relative value of participatory organizations. In the article In Defense of Theory Y by Edgar Schein, Schein said, actually, this is only appropriate for certain engineering and professional enterprises. So even his supporters could not accept the conception of a broadly democratic call. And McGregor demonstrated his commitment to greater democratization in his various positions in organizations like auto supply company and at MIT and at Antioch College. But I must say, as I say this, that notice that even in an effort to be critical, one has the temptation to do a little bit too much hagiography. He's a very interesting person to me, but I cannot say that he is the end all in any sense. We need to be critical to place people in context. But I do believe that Schmidt and McGregor represent the poles of the dichotomy. Thank you, Sarah. Considering other important management thinkers about whom critical biographies have been written in some cases, Mary Parker Follett was a fascinating social worker, early woman PhD, had a nonconformist identity, talked about power with rather than power over, and appeared to raise questions with existing hierarchies. Neil Chamberlain, who wrote about the union challenge to management control, and I think showed a level of sympathy even as managers in the US were beginning to fight back. Peter Drucker, I think, who struggled with his own elite background and the effect of the Nazi experience comes to some more moderate humanist approaches in his own practice and theory. Sarah? And now time for Rosetta.
Oh, thank you, David. Well, I am going to talk about a scholar who was not stationary on the spectrum of the humanist participatory paradigm or the functional elite paradigm. And that person is Beatrice Webb. Beatrice Webb, née Potter, was born in 1858 to an affluent family. She had access to the lifestyle and privileges of high society. Private governesses provided her early education, which she augmented by reading a wide variety of books about various topics. Additionally, Webb was brought up to take an interest in politics and spent many hours in the House of Commons listening to the debates. She also learned from her travel experiences abroad, as she often accompanied her wealthy father on business trips. Now, Beatrice Webb emerged from a curious onlooker to a participative social investigator. Webb's early awareness of social concerns began while traveling with her father. She was 15 years old when she visited the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City and scorned the inferior treatment of the wives of the Mormon leaders. At 19, she studied the underlying assumptions of political economy and concluded that there was a social element to economics, which was in tension with economic orthodoxy. By the time she was 21, she contemplated the bases of justice and wrote in her diary that she was going to live a serious life to help fulfill the law of progress. That was a pivotal moment in her values, as her biography reported that shortly afterwards, she became improvident, unconditional, and nonconformist. One of the major influences in her life was Charles Booth. She became apprenticed to her cousin, Charles Booth, and under Charles Booth, she investigated the conditions of British working class by studying dock workers and the sweating system in the tailoring trade. She explored the practices and institutions of working class neighborhoods that were neglected by the middle class. She also pioneered empirical approaches in the social sciences and provided a remarkable example of engaged scholarship. Another influence of Beatrice Webb was Herbert Spencer. She was influenced by Herbert Spencer, but turned his ideas upside down. According to Muggeridge and Adams, it was inspiration from Spencer's theory of social organism that led Webb to devote her life to scientific investigation of social institutions. Webb was also influenced by the Fabian Society. She adopted Fabian's philosophy of socialism through slow and bloodless reform instead of insurrection or utopianism. And maybe the final and largest impact on her life was her husband, Sidney Webb. She embraced Sidney Webb's ideas that working class organizations should effectively serve political purposes. And together, they wrote a history of trade unions. She also embraced his idea that collective bargaining, legal enactment, and mutual aid were the methods of trade unions. So against that background, we can see how Beatrice Webb became an organization theorist and author. She investigated the idea of solving the problem of poverty via cooperatives, advocated the idea of a minimum standard of life. And that minimum standard of life for her includes national old age pension, medical relief via public health authorities, and a program to deal with unemployment. She also proposed the theory of efficiency wages and coined the term collective bargaining. Sarah? All right. As with many writers, it is profitable to situate Webb's ideas, practices, and personality in a social and historical context. Her demonstrated values, roles, and intellectual contributions reveal an individual engaged in her environment. Following Jacobs, it would be appropriate to associate Webb with a set of values in transition from the elitist pole to the humanistic, participatory, egalitarian alternative, as she traversed from multiple roles, starting from being a privileged hostess to charity worker, to social scientist, and eventually social reformer. Beatrice Webb described her multiple apprenticeships, her partnership studies, and shared projects with such individuals as her mentor, Herbert Spencer, Charles Booth, and Sidney Webb. The title of her autobiography, My Apprenticeship, is apt. Therefore, it seems fitting to seek to characterize her underlying values, her many roles, contribution in ideas and practices, and the multiple contexts she explored as the critical biography approach recommends. Sarah, Beatrice was able to assess Spencer's contribution to her thinking, that he encouraged her to regard social institutions as akin to plants and animals, rife for classification and explanation in the throes of processes susceptible to identification and prediction. Beatrice Webb retained this concern for causal relations among social phenomena, even as she questions Spencer's larger analysis. The weaknesses within Spencer's thought propelled her to a new analysis, which in her own words read as follows. This generalization illuminated my mind. The importance of functional adaptation was, for instance, at the basis of a good deal of faith in collective regulation that I afterwards developed. Once engaged in the application of the scientific method of the facts of social organization, in my observations of East End life, of cooperation, of factory acts, of trade unionism, I shook myself completely free from laissez-faire bias. In fact, I suffered from a somewhat violent reaction from it. Sarah?
Thank you. And now time for Fernanda.
Hi, hello, thank you. I'm going to talk now about Alberto Guerreiro Ramos. It is a contribution from Latin America, specifically from Brazil, and we are in the special issue interested in authors and theories from all over the world, including India and other contexts, as someone asked. Alberto Guerreiro Ramos is a highly influential author in Brazil. He was a Black man, son of a poor family, born in the interior agrarian part of Bahia. Bahia is the largest state in Brazil and also has the largest Black population outside Africa continent. In Brazil, his work is influential in political science, sociology, management theory, and some of his personal characteristics and professional trajectory shape his growing concern in carrying on intellectual work. Ilaria, next slide, please. His work is committed to solving several problems in Brazil, and I would highlight four major drives in his trajectory and his biography that stands out. First is his participation, engagement with the Brazilian Black movement, the Black experimental theater with Abdias do Nascimento, the founding of several other initiatives in the Black movement. He also assumed several administrative roles during Getúlio Vargas' government in the 50s in Brazil. He also joined the Higher Institute of Brazilian Studies. He was a founder of this institute. And also, Guerreiro Ramos was elected federal deputy, substitute federal deputy for the Labour Party in 1963. And later he has his political rights revoked during the military dictatorship. So several of these drives shapes his trajectory and influences his theoretical work. I can say that his work is worth studying due to his intellectual qualifications, his work, the current nature of the topics he was highlighting in his work, the ethic and racial issues, analysis of whiteness in Brazil, Brazilian national project, criticism of Eurocentrism in the 60s, in the 50s, also the theory of populism, and several instances regarding Brazilian public administration and challenging management theory from a Brazilian perspective. He also had a very highly interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary bias in his work. Next slide, please. When exploring Guerreiro Ramos' contributions, I will highlight three major works. The first one is the Sociological Reduction from 1968, in which he developed a Brazilian way of thinking and rethinking sociology. He was directly challenging what he called the canned foreign sociology of Marxist influence. He was a progressive thinker, someone that wanted to do a different sociology, and so he proposes the idea of sociological reduction as a method to analyze the social conceptions of facts and processes, and to produce local knowledge, local theories by highlighting historical context. So Guerreiro Ramos expresses sociological reduction as a way of not consuming a critically imported knowledge, and he was discussing it 50 years before the decolonial movements of the 2000s, despite not being recognized as an influential work to this movement. Nowadays, he's being revisited on the way sociological thought helps us in the decoloniality process, the coloniality of mind, of thought, and knowledge. Next, Ilaria, please. In this idea of sociological reductionism, he was really influential nowadays for management and organization studies too, and critical thinking, with the idea of critical consciousness, the idea of the subject, the individual, to rethink the determinants of their lives, and the way of to have possession again of your own destiny in terms of gaining a self-determination, and also not only to exclude other thoughts and other possibilities, but in terms of providing dialogue of the universal consciousness and the personal and consciousness, an essential attitude of translating and challenging and positioning. So Guerreiro also discussed the idea of the collective author that should not be confused with nationalism and the criticism of Eurocentrism as an opposition, but a way of positioning and putting context to rethink these relations when you are outside the center. Next slide, Ilaria, please. Another important work of Guerreiro Ramos for management theory, and it's through this book, The New Science of Organizations, A Nova Ciência das Organizações, it was first published in English, because Guerreiro Ramos, when he got his political rights revoked, he was invited to be a professor at University of Southern California, and he worked there until the end of his life, and he published the book in 1980. And in this book, he had the time to think the way Brazilian management developed into Getúlio Vargas' government, the way it was established bureaucracy and the not yet managerialism, but the way the influence of traditional administrative theory was not adequate to Brazilian context. So in his exile, he was able to develop a theory that was challenging traditional management theory and trying to overcome the predominance of this instrumental reasoning, trying to develop what he called substantive reason and the Homo parentheticus in opposition to the Homo economicus. And his book from the 80s is being read in Brazilian part of it, administrative courses, management courses, and was influential to the growing of, we can say, Brazilian critical management studies since the beginning of the 90s in Brazil. Next slide, please, Hilaria. And it's interesting because we can relate and coordinate sociological reduction, new science of organization with particularities of his trajectory. The first one with his movement with ISAB, the second one, his participation within the administrative structure of Brazil when administration was being built in our country. And this third movement is a rereading that is being done nowadays. And the way Guerreiro Ramos is being reabsorbed by several intellectuals, considering his contribution to this, to revisiting Black thought, Black movements in Brazil. He was there since the beginning with Abdias do Nascimento, his personal friend, in developing the Black experimental theater, in which Black people on the stage as a collective experience, they were building ways of, and training ways of facing and challenging racism in their daily lives. And the experimental Black theater was also a platform to insert Black people in several spaces, to have representativeness in several spaces. So it was an important movement that Guerreiro Ramos, despite being an intellectual, a sociologist, a man from the law schools also, he was able to put himself, see himself as a Black person that was able to, after 50 years of the abolition of slavery, to become an intellectual, and how he could contribute to his reposition and to build this Black movement in Brazil. So the rereading of his texts nowadays is really interesting because the way he problematized racism in the 40s, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, he has several writings from all these decades. And the way he was dealing it is particular to Brazil, but contributive to international literature, because in Brazil, we don't have, after the abolition, we don't have an apartheid, a formal apartheid as in South Africa or the United States, but the myth of racial democracy was built here, and Guerreiro is discussing in his thought, in his writings, how people should build transformation upon this racial democracy myth as a way to confront racism. How could Black people, from within the structures of racism, find places and spots to try to deconstruct and rebuild from within? He was criticized and also being discussed from his suggestions in his way nowadays in Brazil. And an important contribution of him, his work, is the idea of the social pathology of Brazilian whiteness, on how Black, whites, and whitoids in Brazil were all victims of a colonial condition, and how this colonial condition creates a pathology of this racial democracy that makes racism goes underneath, and not by the same time the reproduction of the system. So this is the third major way we can discuss Guerreiro. We can connect his personal trajectory with really nowadays important topics for Brazil and for the whole discussion in several other spaces. Next slide, please. So I would say, just to conclude, that Guerreiro work, we can explore several connections between his influences, life trajectory, his thought in management and organization, scholar in Brazilian sociology, because he has an idea of complexity, multiplicity, and embeddedness of his thought in several episodes of his lives with different process. So we can have at least 3 different biographies focusing on each of these 3 streams of thought. So this is my contribution, the idea of how we can build and reveal this idea of fighting of invidious hierarchies in a context, not in the center of management theory, but how, at least in Brazil, an intellectual can discuss and try to deconstruct exploitative hierarchies, irresponsible management practices. This is just a contribution on how we can build a case like that. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Fernanda. I appreciate all these contributions. Let me say something broadly about the project, briefly. One is that if you consider many of these voices, we're talking about people whose brains exploded in interaction with various debates. For example, Beatrice Webb, having become a disciple of Herbert Spencer, who was a libertarian individualist, market enthusiast, found the conditions of the working class to contradict his thinking, and her brain seems to have been exploded by this experience. And then we see others whose experience caused them to shift their basic assumptions about the world. In these critical biographies, we're describing people whose ideas are in flux, who are confronting challenges, and their ideas and approaches are being transformed by that. Also, it is always a temptation to write in a too flavorful sense of an individual, and we've struggled with that as well. In the case of Beatrice Webb, it's very interesting that later in her life, and life of her husband, Sidney Webb, they became very enamored of the Soviet Union, and in a sense lost the particular focus on the actual condition of the working class, who are not necessarily benefiting from all actions of the Soviet state. So in a sense, they lost their focus on their initial concerns, at least from my perspective. Everybody's views are always in flux. We need to look at individuals in this process of change and movement in their approach to the world. Thank you very much. Now, it's time to look to see if there are any questions. Are there any questions at this point?
Hello, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. As Alex gathers the questions, this was really inspiring, and I think the potential of this, I think calling it a method, it seems reductive to me, but the potential of critical biography in terms of anti-racist work, feminist work, in kind of like as a opening up to social justice and, you know, hidden, silenced or neglected stories and histories and, you know, roles, and it's just absolutely wonderful. And you know, I can see how this could feed into, you know, kind of actual stories of individuals or multiple individuals, or as a method and as a methodology, as an approach. I think, you know, this has been so inspiring. Thank you so much. Alex, did you want to? I did kind of like.
I saw yours. Why don't you?
Sorry, I used my privilege to sneak in a little question. I'm happy to ask it, but I wanted to see if other colleagues had other questions first.
So we don't currently have any open questions, apart from there was half a question from Swapnesh in the chat of whether you open to submissions from the Indian context. I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'll let you answer.
Yes, definitely. We would like global representation and a kind of density of networks. It may be audacious for us, but I think that there's a way of collecting stories in this context that give us a nice view on the development of conceptions of management in various contexts. So it's designed to be extendable, and we definitely want voices hitherto unheard unrepresented and marginalized to be reflected here. Also, the template can be used, I think, in a way that relates to any individual. This may seem absurd, but one of the inspirations of the template was the work of Marshall Gans at Kennedy School. He was seeking to train organizers for trade unions and for the Obama campaign, and he engaged in his trainees in personal narratives. They told him their stories, and their stories helped them get a sense of their capacity. So there is an idea here that suggests that people can learn from their own experiences and generate a sense of their own criticality in larger debates. Thank you, Ilaria and Alex.
Thanks, David. And just Ilaria, if you're happy to wait, I saw that David, you've been answering questions directly in Q&A. I'm just wondering whether it might be useful for the purposes of recording, and those who are watching the recording to just read out those questions and answer them live, well, with voice, so that those who are watching the recording can also benefit from the answers.
Well, I'll get to that. At least I'll do one. Do you foresee the special issue focusing on the questions of critical biography as method, or on specific cases individuals reconsidered through this method, or both in combination? And I think that it would be fine to have an essay that looks at the method as well. So it seems that we would be open to both. And I guess, oh, here's some of the question. What are the dates? And thank you, Ilaria, for going to the call for papers, because the dates were on the tip of my brain. July 1st is the opening date next year, closing date October 31st. The call for papers has the details. And Ilaria, can you post the call for papers in the chat once again?
Yes, yeah, we'll copy that in the chat again. And I've just sent it to two friends of mine who said they already knew about it. So I think it's already been widely visited online, but we'll put it here again.
Well, thank you. We want to simulate a wide debate. I think it's, I find it exciting to talk to people about this, because they see that it's not just about great figures here and there. It's about the people they want to introduce into the debate. And as they consider a specific individual, they themselves become a part of the debate. You feel that you are becoming you are a participant in the debate because you are actually challenging and pursuing argument with this great figure or lesser figure in the world. Any thoughts from Nick and Fernanda and Rosetta?
Well, David, just to pick up on that, I think you said it brilliantly. I believe that is the avenue to the question here about writing differently, to be intertwined with who it is that you're giving a critical biography to, and to have both accounts, yourself, reflexivity, but also the person that you are biographing. Melding those two together, I think, would make for an excellent contribution, not only to, if it goes down the method piece, but also on the styles of writing. I think it's so open, and the borders around what we're looking for are debated, that would be welcomed.
Thank you, Dave. And in fact, one interesting possibility would be a dialogue, a fictionalized dialogue with an interesting figure who is important to you, which illuminates the debate, creates it in real time. I would find that fascinating.
And also start with an art piece or a poem, can start over a discussion on a context, a specific context, a historical context, and then a biography can come up from this. It would be beautiful too, yeah.
Thank you. This is both comforting and dangerous, because it's opening up so many ideas in my head now. But there's plenty of time to send in contributions, because I think the window of submission is between July and let me see, in October 2024. So there's plenty of time to put something together that is, you know, that is both personal or, you know, kind of like focused on one specific person or group of people, or, you know, a methodological contribution, as you said as well. So thank you so much. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Or any other questions that we might have in the
Currently none available, but if anybody wants to ask, now is your chance.
We can put our emails in the chat so people can get in touch with us. Obviously.
Thank you. And just to say, I know that especially early career colleagues are very hesitant to get in touch with special issue editors to just like, you know, brainstorm ideas or propose. So, but I know that our colleagues are really, really encouraging, you know, people to get in touch with them to discuss possible ideas. And so please, you know, don't feel intimidated. Get in touch with them if you have ideas that you want to develop, or if you have something that is already developed and you want to see if it fits the special issue and the focus of that. So please, you know, don't hesitate. And as I said, this recording will be on our CMS in Touch YouTube channel. So if you want to listen again and have a look at the slides and those wonderful resources, they will be there shortly. We try to put them up within a week. So bear with us, but we'll be there shortly. And as I said, please don't forget to follow our X account and our LinkedIn account. If you have any kind of questions for us as a CMS in Touch team, do let us know.
The closing slide to show Sarah.
Sarah, do you mind putting up the closing slide? Thank you. And the next one, please. Thank you. So this is just to highlight our next events. I am slightly partial to the first one because I will be in conversation with Gabrielle, Sohib, and Christine on how to be and become an associate editor. So we'll be sharing our experiences and some advice, especially for colleagues who are thinking of applying to associate editor's position, or currently in associate editor's position and would like to join that kind of community as well. We have another special issue event in February on Unlearning from the Margins in Management and Organization Research. This is a management learning special issue. Then we have a hot off the press, so it's a new book launch by Carol Elliott in Critical Thinking in Human Resources Development. And then still in February, we have another event on projectification of organizations, governance, and societies. So as you can see, it's going to be a busy start of the year, but we look forward to seeing you there. And please feel free to share these via the QR codes as well on the slide. Thank you all for joining us today. To our wonderful panelists, it's been really a pleasure for us to host you, and I look forward to seeing the special issue in print.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for us. I think for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.